It was on a Sunday evening, as we sat down to dinner, that we heard a knock at the door. When I went to the door, Billy was standing there. It was truly a miracle. Math never flies on Sunday or at night, but it was both. Billy and the other missionaries with him had received word from Math that they would be evacuating all personnel from Zaire until further notice. They gave Billy and the others with him the option of being on that last flight out. Billy told me later that he seriously considered not leaving. It was mainly because the fighting had never came to that area. All had stayed calm, and he felt he would be okay if he decided to stay. Because the fighting was so sporadic and widespread, he felt it would all blow over and things would be back to normal soon. But the more he thought about what could happen, and especially since I was already out of the country, he decided to go ahead and leave with the rest of them, and then if things did settle down soon, he could go back. He was so sure of being able to go back that he did not even take his allotted amount of kilos he had been given for the flight. Another missionary leaving with him had planned on going on furlough as soon as they reached Nairobi, so he gave his kilos to help them be able to take more of their things out. He left most of his clothes, all important papers and documents, and took only what he would need for the next few days. All the time he was thinking he would be going back very soon. Our return to Isiro, Zaire never happened. In fact, the day after Billy left, things blew up in Isiro. We heard that a Catholic priest was killed and that our house and all our belongings were looted or destroyed. We were all safe, but what was going on? Had God really called us to Zaire? This was the second evacuation, and we wondered if we should reconsider where God had called us. The answer came to me one day as I read 1 Kings about Elijah and how the Lord provided the brook and the ravens to meet his needs, but the brook dried up. God had told Elijah to go to the Cherith brook, and then when the brook dried up, Elijah did not give up. Rather, he got up and went on. So must we. We would not let this stop us from continuing to be servants of the living God. We would be available to go and do whatever he would ask of us. But where would that be? And what would we do? I had a few pieces of clothing that I had brought out with me, and Billy had less than I did. That was all we owned. We knew that God was in control of our lives, and even though our brook for ministry in Zaire seemed to have dried up, he would lead us and show us soon what to do next. It just so happened that Bob McCulley was taking a small team into Rwanda the next day after Billy's arrival, and he invited Billy to go along. I could stay in Nairobi with Bob's wife, Merle. Bob and Merle had become very close friends of ours since our days in Nairobi. They had lived and worked out in the bush with the Maasai tribe, and each time they came into Nairobi, they would come to our house and we would pamper them for a few days by preparing foods that they were unable to get out in the bush. Our friendship grew and we became very close, even sharing Christmas and other holidays together. When Billy came back from Rwanda, he had fallen in love with the people of the country there. We started praying and asking God if that would be where He would want us to go next. We waited and we prayed all during the holidays of December 1996. In early January 1997, we met with our leaders, and it was decided that in March we would move to Rwanda. There had been missionaries living there recently, but they had decided to leave. They left a fully furnished house that the Kenya Field continued to pay the rent so that until a missionary was found to move there, they would use the house to send missionaries over from time to time to work and encourage the church there. A fully furnished house is exactly what we needed, as we had nothing since being evacuated. What a blessing to walk into a home that had everything we needed, including linens, furniture, and dishes. Rwanda had just come through a horrible genocide where around 100,000 of the Tutsi population was killed by the other major tribe in the country, the Hutus. The first church of the Assemblies of God had just started before the war started happening in 1994. But when we arrived in Kigali, Rwanda, in March 1997, there were about 26 churches and outstations, with one being a permanent building. Billy was able to help build that first church and teach the first class of the Bible school, started shortly after we arrived. Before moving to Kigali, we were able to go home for Jennifer and Eric's wedding. That was a blessed time, a gift from God. We felt God had sent Eric to our family, and they were perfect for each other. While we were at home in the States, we were able to purchase clothes and personal things that we had lost in the evacuation. So with these things, plus the furnishings that came with the house, we began our new life and our new mission in Kigali, Rwanda. The country of Rwanda was just coming back to life after the horrible genocide of 1994. The president was working hard to restore and reconcile the two tribes still in the country. Many refugees that had fled the country returned, and things were becoming more normal. The country became known as the cleanest and safest place to be in Africa. The infrastructure and the technology flourished throughout the city of Kigali. Old mud houses were torn down and new cemented ones put up. New stores, shopping malls, and restaurants were established. One of the ways that helped beautify the country was the once-a-month workday for all citizens. On this day, no one was allowed to open their stores or work in their businesses, but they must spend the morning cleaning the area of their homes or businesses, picking up all trash or debris and planting flowers and trees. They dug holes in the cement sidewalks and planted trees in downtown Kigali and down the center of the lanes on major roads. Today, Kigali is one of the most beautiful and modern towns in Africa. We lived there 15 years, from March 1997 until July 2012. So many things were accomplished, and God was over all of it, leading the way and giving us strength and wisdom. Once again, we tried to learn a new language, Kinyarwanda. It was very difficult, and by the time our classes were over, we could understand much more than we could say. So many people were learning English, and in fact, the president was working to make English one of the major languages by having teachers teach it in all of the schools. By the time we left Rwanda, I was able to carry on full conversations in English with people that I could only greet and shake their hands in the beginning. In the beginning of our term in Rwanda, Billy traveled a lot outside the city, holding crusades and showing the Jesus film. When we arrived in Rwanda, there were only 23 churches, but by 2003, that number had grown to 101. At each place that he held a crusade and showed the film, a church was established. When we left in 2012, there were 150 churches. The Bible school was started the year we arrived and continues to this day. We were able to purchase land, build the Bible school, classrooms, dorms, restrooms, and a cafeteria. On the same property, 2 homes for missionaries were built, and we were able to move into one of them in 2003. I put the whole library together in the Bible school using the knowledge that I had learned about classifying and cataloging books when we were in East Africa School of Theology in Kenya. The school had a risograph machine, and so I learned to print, collate, and bind all the textbooks for the school. The last few years spent in Rwanda, I became certified to teach English as a second language, and I stayed very busy with teaching classes and several people that I would meet with individually and teach English. We did miss being in Zaire and all the dear pastor friends that we had made there, but we fell in love with Rwanda. Everyone we knew had been affected by the genocide. Everyone had lost a family member. Some even watched their loved ones being killed. So many were traumatized by the violence that had went on in the country for 100 days. But there were many testimonies of God protecting people's lives and telling them where and when to go and hide from being killed. We just sat with them and we listened to their stories. We loved on them and we prayed with them. We went into Rwanda not with our own agenda and ideas of how to change the people, but just to love them and share the love of Jesus with everyone we met. We became very close to so many as we opened our home and our hearts to each one. When we arrived in Rwanda in March 1997, it had only been 3 years since the killing of the genocide. Even though it was fairly safe in the capital city where we lived in Kigali, there were parts of the country where there were still unrest. It was not safe to travel very far into the country without military escort. Even in Kigali, there were signs up everywhere to stay on main roads and on the main path, as there were landmines all throughout the area. There was an organization in Rwanda that was there to comb the area and destroy all the old landmines. One day, they found a landmine and destroyed it right outside the gate of our house. Truly, God had protected us as this was an area that Jason often played soccer with the neighbor children. One night, we were awakened by the sound of gunfire going off constantly. We laid in bed and listened and prayed that it was not the genocide happening all over again. By morning, we found out from a pastor friend of ours that it was the police who had captured a band of thieves just across the street and down a little ways from our house. He said about 7 men had been killed. After this happened, I fought the spirit of fear. Many nights I went to bed with the Bible on my chest or under my pillow. I trusted His word, and it never failed me. God gave sweet peace and protected us from the many dangers that surrounded us. If you would like to know more about this 1994 100 Days of Genocide in Rwanda, because I'm only telling a very small part, I'd recommend 2 movies. One is called 100 Days in April, and the other one is called Hotel Rwanda. Both of these movies depict pretty accurately what happened during those 100 days. The most interesting thing was that most of the people that were killed, it wasn't by bullets or even bombs, but it was by hatchet. Many, many people were hatched to death, one at a time. Our own General Superintendent of the Assemblies of God's wife, her name is Christine. She has a wonderful story of God's protecting hand over her life during the genocide. She was all alone during this time as her husband and children had went out of the country just before the genocide had begun. The Lord would speak to her and tell her where to hide and when to move from that hiding place when the enemy was near. She walked through a roadblock one day without being seen. Truly, the Lord covered her, protecting her during the 100 days of genocide. We heard many, many stories just like Christine's from others, and they all gave me the courage to live there and know that God would protect and keep me. Rwanda remembers every year during this time, and their theme for that time is called Never Again.